Hadith. No excuses for old men. This is from the Sahih al-Bukhari collection number 6419. The Prophet said, Allah will not accept the excuse of any person whose instant of death is delayed until he is 60 years of age. Traditionally, wisdom comes with age. As the years go by, people become smarter and wiser and more knowledgeable. When a young person dies, it's a tragedy because of all that unrealized potential, because of the years that were lost. But when an old person dies, it's a tragedy because of the knowledge that was lost when that person goes into the ground and you cannot access that anymore. At least that's the way it's supposed to work. Traditionally, you start as an idiot and then become less idiotic as the years go by. That's what happened to me. That's what happened to many people I know. That's what happens in general around the world, and it's been that way pretty much for all time. However, any generalized truth also has its outliers. And I'll bet you have seen at least one of these outliers in your time, if not several. If you're young, just wait a little while. If you're a little older, you've probably seen this. You run into someone with gray hair and plenty of wrinkles and 70 years behind them. And then you talk to this person and you learn nothing. In fact, you come away from that conversation utterly blown away by this person and thinking, how did you do that? How did you manage to live so long and learn so little? And this isn't an educational thing. It's a wisdom thing. I've seen this phenomenon at various educational levels. Just because you have a doctorate does not mean you are wise, or an Ivy League degree. I have met Ivy Leaguers who are lunkheads. It happens. Just because you have money or a successful business, that does not mean you are wise. What I'm talking about is people who have grown old and yet have not grown in any way. And it's quite jarring the first time you see this. Say you're a teenager and you run into an old man who talks your ear off without saying anything at all. And then you dig a little deeper. And to your surprise, there's nothing there. And so you're standing there and you're thinking, listen, I know I don't have a ton of relevant things to say. There's a lot that I do not understand, let alone things that I have mastered. But I'm a teenager. What's your excuse? How can you live for so long and never improve anything? How can you go that many years without learning anything? How is it possible to basically stand in one place, mentally and spiritually, for 70 years? That lack of growth almost takes a willing effort to never see anything or understand anything. And this can happen later in life too, when you meet someone who is supposed to be your peer, someone at least, say, middle-aged, and you're middle-aged. And so you start talking, and he opens his mouth, and you flash back to being in junior high or high school. And you realize this person is still there. His brain and his heart, they're exactly the same as they were decades earlier. And you think, what have you been doing this whole time? And this is precisely the phenomenon that Muhammad is talking about here. Remember that the final judgment is never a black and white thing. At least from our perspective, it isn't. We don't know people's hearts as God does, and we can't judge situations with the wisdom that God can. But one thing that is probably true The longer you live, the greater your chance to actually see truth, the greater your chance to attain the wisdom to understand that, for instance, your imam or your priest is not an idiot. This stuff comes from somewhere. That maybe, instead of deciding that you already know everything, it might benefit you to lean on the 1,000+ years of tradition that came before you. And that moment of critical mass, when the evidence stacks up enough that it can finally crush your ego under its weight, it comes at different times for different people. But the older that you are, the greater your chances that this will happen to you. And Muhammad is giving a helpful timeline here. 60 years, which is actually quite generous. 60 years to get it together. That's a lot of time. And it probably includes decades as a parent and maybe some years as a grandparent if you're really lucky. 60 years of observing the world and moving within it. 60 years to consider human nature and its relation to God. 60 years of God coming at you. And for some, this includes 60 years of ignoring the warnings and the wisdom of God and his messengers and the natural siren song of the divine. 60 years of maintaining your ego in such a way that God cannot find a crack, cannot wedge himself into your heart. It's sad, really. So Muhammad's talking more about spiritual ignorance, but it very much looks like sort of the worldly ignorance that I started this episode talking about. If you have 60 years and you still say no, Muhammad is saying here, age is not an excuse. Just like in the world, when you meet a 60-year-old person who has no wisdom and no knowledge or anything, that person just doesn't have an excuse anymore. So back to Muhammad. He's saying you can't tell God, well, I didn't really understand and my life was cut short. So really, if you had let me live longer, I would have gotten it. That's the excuse of a teenager who dies in a battle, not of an old man who has been given every opportunity to understand God and his world. And here, Muhammad is giving a time limit for ignorance and stupidity. 60 years. Do it or don't. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next time. Inshallah.